and I actually spent some of my growing up years right here in Delhi, in one of the most congested cities on earth. It's a massive place, hustle, bustle, it's crazy, sensory overload here. But as you're, driving along or whatnot, you may catch a glimpse of what is clearly a medieval wall or something. And I remember hearing, even as a kid, about the 7 cities of Delhi. The 7 cities of Delhi. It sounds so awesome, so mysterious. And the fact that you can see ruins here and there, or you'll be walking along and in between 2 buildings, you'll see what looks like a 500-year-old mosque or a tomb or whatnot. Or you go play in the park, and there's some building that's clearly, 800 years old or something, sitting right there. That just adds to the mystery. What are these 7 cities of Delhi? So I thought, while I'm here, I'm going to try and identify and find the 7 cities of Delhi. Now, the problem with that is there's no agreement on the identity of the 7 cities, and there's more than 7. In fact, we're going to talk about 11 over the course of the next few minutes. The 7 cities, really 11 cities of Delhi. Here we go. Now, according to the Mahabharata, thousands of years ago, the Pandav brothers were given 5 villages to rule over. And one of those villages was supposedly located right around here, and it was called Indraprastha, located here in the Delhi area. Now, there's no archaeological evidence that Indraprastha ever even really existed, let alone that it existed here, but that hasn't stopped some overzealous Indian politicians from trying to rename Delhi Indraprastha. Madras was renamed Chennai, Calcutta, Kolkata, Bombay is Mumbai, but Delhi is still Delhi so far. So where did that name come from? Well, according to one tradition, the Pandav brothers, after the end of the Mahabharata war, built the Yogmaya temple. It's today near Qutub Minar in Delhi. And around this temple grew up a town, Yoginipura. And eventually a Mauryan king named Raja Dilu took over Yoginipura and renamed it after himself, Dilu, or Delhi. Now, how much of this is truth and how much of it is tradition and myth? Good luck trying to find out. Now, certainly by the time of the next of the 7 cities, so-called, this place was being called Delhi, or Dilika. At that point, it was being ruled over by what was for Delhi a relatively very long-lived dynasty, that of the Tomars. The Tomars, these are a Rajput people. The Tomars ruled here for several centuries. And as far as we know, it was the Tomars who built the first fort in this area. It's called Lal Kot. Lal Kot, the first of the historic 7 cities. You can go and actually touch the stones of Lal Kot. Okay? It was the Tomars who fought Sebuktigin from Ghazni, the great Ghaznavid ruler Sebuktigin. Jaipal led a North Indian confederacy, including, of course, the troops of the Tomar polity itself. 100,000 troops, by the way, in this North Indian confederacy, marching all the way to Ghazni itself. Now, picture that. That doesn't happen very often in South Asian history. A native, really non-Muslim South Asian army marching way outside of South Asia itself. That's pretty rare. And they march all the way to Ghazni. Of course, they fail. And Sebuktigin's much more famous son, the oft invading Mahmud of Ghazni, he'll sweep into India. He'll face Jaipal again and defeat him, and Jaipal will end up committing suicide by fire. But the Tomars rose from the ashes, and they ruled on even after the Ghaznavid invasions. They're the ones who brought the Iron Pillar. This is a pillar that could date back to the Gupta period. They uprooted it and brought it here, where it still stands here in Delhi. They built many towns and cities beyond just Lal Kot and beyond the Delhi area. Well, in the late 1100s, the Tomar polity was taken down and conquered by Prithviraj Chauhan. Prithviraj Chauhan was the king of Ajmer. This is another Rajput group. Okay, they come in here, he takes Lal Kot, he expands it, and he creates a new city, same site but bigger, called Kila Rai Pitora, or Rai Pitora's fort. Rai Pitora being another name for Prithviraj Chauhan himself. Prithviraj Chauhan was able to carve out quite the empire for himself in northwest India, though he did have to come up against, eventually, the forces of Muhammad of Ghur. So we had Mahmud of Ghazni, but the next great Muslim invader is Muhammad of Ghur. Muhammad of Ghur had been invading India since Prithviraj Chauhan was a little kid. But now that he's consolidated his own conquests in northwest India, he comes head-to-head with Prithviraj Chauhan and his empire. And though Prithviraj Chauhan's able to sort of repel him multiple times, he's got hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of war elephants, lots of cavalry. Eventually he does succumb and lose his life. the Ghurids had taken Delhi. Now, one of Muhammad of Ghur's slaves, also ablest generals, his name was Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, he was put in charge of Muhammad of Ghur's North Indian possessions. And when Muhammad was assassinated, Qutb-ud-Din Aibak became Lord of North India, essentially, founding his own dynasty, the Mamluk or slave dynasty. And thus was initiated the Delhi Sultanate, the famous Delhi Sultanate, a series of dynasties ruling almost always from Delhi itself. And around 1300, the second dynasty, the Khilji dynasty, came here to Siri and built a fort. It just so happened that the Khiljis were up against a very formidable invader, none other than the Mongols. Mongols were taking over so much of Asia, pushing into Europe, the Middle East. They came into India too, they rode into India too. But luckily, for the Khiljis at least, the Khiljis had a general, the undefeated Zafar Khan. And it was Zafar Khan who sent the Mongols packing. So picture this fort surrounded by Mongol cavalry. Yet they were sent packing by Zafar Khan. They were not successful in conquering India. Now they did hold some of northwest Indian territory for a little while, but ultimately they were sent on their way. Now, counting Siri, 4 of the 7 cities of Delhi were built in the 1300s alone. And the next ruling dynasty after the Khiljis, the ruling dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate, were the Tughlaqs. And the Tughlaqs built this massive 6-mile city called Tughlaqabad. Now keep in mind that the memory of Mongol invasion and that Mongol threat is still fresh in people's minds. So they built this massive fort, probably the most impressive ruins in Delhi. I remember vividly being here 27 years ago when I was 10. They left an impression on me. But no matter how massive and awesome the fort, a fort and a city of course develops around it, needs water. And unfortunately, Tughlaqabad suffered from a scarcity of water. Of course, it didn't help that a local Sufi saint also cursed the place. Now, amazingly, after only a few decades, the awesome Tughlaqabad was abandoned. There were water issues and there are other issues. It was abandoned, and the great warmongering Tughlaq ruler, Muhammad ibn Tughlaq, built a new Tughlaq capital, in the space between Siri Fort and Fort Rai Pitora. In fact, this is its outer wall. There's not much left of Jahanpana, or refuge of the world, but this is its outer wall. It was basically meant to maybe connect all the cities of Delhi into one great walled conglomerate. Well, it wasn't too long before Muhammad ibn Tughlaq decided to abandon this city and temporarily relocated everybody, animals, people, everybody from Jahanpana to central India, to Daulatabad. Well, that didn't go too well. It was disastrous, in fact, and eventually they're all going to come back here. But it's a great demonstration of the power of rulers to upend their subjects' lives. Now, the next of these 7 cities of Delhi was built by Muhammad ibn Tughlaq's cousin, Feroz Shah, so another Tughlaq, and it's called Ferozabad. And it was built on the banks of the Yamuna in the hopes of avoiding the water scarcity problem that had so plagued other cities in the Delhi area. And it was Feroz Shah who, while out on campaign, snagged a couple Ashoka pillars. Now, Ashoka, the great ancient Mauryan king, had supposedly inscribed all these edicts on these sandstone pillars. Well, Feroz Shah grabbed a couple, brought them back to Delhi, and one of them is still here. It's right over there. Now, Delhi had been able to withstand a Mongol invasion, but it was while the Delhi Sultanate was here at Ferozabad that Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, invaded with his army. And in this case, Delhi was not so lucky. Delhi was ravaged, plundered, tens of thousands were killed brutally before Timur, left and rode back up into Central Asia. Still, the Delhi Sultanate survived, but the Tughlaqs were replaced by the Saids and then the Lodis. Now, the Mughals were of Mongol and Turk descent. In fact, Babur was a direct descendant of both Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, and Genghis Khan. In about 1525, he rides into India, he takes over much of North India, and leaves it to his son, Humayun, who builds a city here, Dinpana. This is the first attempt of the Mughals to actually build a city. These are tent dwellers, these are Central Asian tent dwellers. Their capitals are mobile, in tents. But he builds Dinpana, and then is promptly defeated by Sher Shah Suri and driven out of town. Well, Sher Shah builds a city of his own here. He razes Dinpana to the ground and builds Shergar. Humayun, after several years in exile, storms back into India, takes down the Suris, and ends up living here the last little bit of his life. Unfortunately, only a few months after taking down the Suris, he hears the call to prayer. He's in his personal library. He hears the call to prayer, comes rushing down the stairs, falls, trips, injures himself so badly he dies 3 days later. In fact, I think that, well, let me ask this guy. Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Is this the building where Humayun fell down the stairs?
Yeah,
Do you know?
this is the place where he fell.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Yeah, are you the nomadic professor?
I am.
Dude, I'm following you.
Dude, awesome.
You do
Hey,
amazing work.
We'll talk in a second.
Yeah, okay.
Confirmed. This is the place. Now, after Humayun, the next great Mughal emperors, Akbar and Jahangir, preferred to rule from the Agra area. But Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, the guy who built the Taj Mahal, he relocated the Mughal Empire's capital back here to Delhi. He built the magnificent Red Fort, which still stands pretty perfect today. And around the Red Fort developed Shah Jahanabad, what is today called Old Delhi. Old Delhi today occupies the space of what used to be Shah Jahanabad, though it's been totally transformed. Surrounded by a massive wall, you know, there's gates. Some of these massive gates are still around today, but that's Shah Jahanabad. Now, his son Aurangzeb would bring the Mughal Empire to its territorial zenith, but unfortunately for the Mughals, that costs a lot of money and makes a lot of enemies, and it's not a huge surprise that after Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire begins to crumble. And unfortunately for Shah Jahanabad, it would be devastated by a raid from the Persians led by Nadir Shah. It would be temporarily occupied by the Marathas. It still has that, you know, appeal as being the seat of the imperial capital. And then eventually another foreign presence shows up, the British. Well, the British actually saw a rejuvenation somewhat of Shah Jahanabad. That is, until the 1850s, when the mutiny happened. Or if you're an Indian nationalist, the first war of independence. Whatever you want to call it, Delhi became a war zone. And when it was all over, British control was stronger than ever. Except now it wasn't company control, it was crown control. And the British were ruling not from Delhi, but from Calcutta. And this lasted till 1911, when the British decided to move to the traditional capital of Delhi. And they did that. By 1912, Delhi was the new capital, except it wasn't Old Delhi, Shah Jahanabad, or any of the old cities or forts. They built a new city called New Delhi, and it was from here that the British Raj ruled until 1947, the year of India's independence and partition. So there you have it, the 7, really 11 cities of Delhi. And we could add a 12th to the list, post-independence New Delhi. See, after partition, millions of refugees streamed into Delhi, and they needed somewhere to stay. And so the new government hastily threw up places where they could live, often at the expense, very often at the expense of what had existed here before. Much, if not most, of the old cities was either destroyed, hidden, or literally buried under buildings or squished between buildings. In fact, at times, you know, bits of medieval walls and other structures were even used in the construction of some of these new buildings. The result is a series of hidden cities, what Delhi scholar Rakshanda Jalil calls the invisible city, the 7 or 11 or 12 cities of Delhi.